In this video, I'm going to start to explain why we are learning exponents, what they have to do with particular situations in the real world, and basically what we want to be able to get into is describing situations with an exponential model. So here's an example where we just want to start with a basic idea of what we're thinking about, what we want to get into. So suppose you have $5 and it doubles every day. How can we describe this situation with a model? Well, if you think about it, what's changing from one day to the next? Well, if you're waking up the next day, one thing that changed is obviously the day. So we have some unit of time, which we'll call t. Right? We're going to let t equal the time in days. And we also have a unit that's changing, and that's your money. So we'll call this, we'll just say that this is M, for the amount of money. So the amount of money that you have is changing as your time is changing. As time changes, as one day moves on to the next day, we find that our money is changing. So over here on the left side of the screen, over here I have a column for the days, and over here I have a column for the amount of money that we have. So if you think about it, on day one, what we find is that we have, right, if I can get this thing to work, on the first day, which we'll call day 0, right? As we start, day 0, we have $5. Right? The next day, day 1, what are we doing? Well, I'm telling you that your money doubles every day. So when you wake up that next day, what just happened? From day 0 to day 1, you're going to multiply by 2. Right? So right here, and I'm going to erase this just to illustrate. Right, down below here, we're starting with what we just had, the $5, and we are now multiplying that by 2. Right. Now the next day, what are we doing? Well, from day 1 to day 2, we're taking whatever we had on day 1 and we're multiplying that by 2. So I'm taking what we had the previous day, which is 5 times 2, and we're multiplying that by 2. Now you might be saying, well, why don't you just multiply this out to get 10, and why don't you multiply this out to get 20? Well, I'm keeping the multiplication of 2 in the problem here so we can illustrate exactly what's happening. We can see that from day 0 on our first day to our second day, I'm multiplying by 1 factor of 2. Then from that day, day 1 to day 2, I'm multiplying by 2 factors of 2. All right, and you can find, and what you'll see is that each day, what you'll have is that you're going to take your previous day. So on day 3, we take what we have on day 2, and we multiply that by 2. So now we're going to have 5 times 2 times 2 times 2. You should be recognizing a pattern here. Right? On day 0, we had no 2's. On day 1, we had 1 2. On day 2, we had 2 2's. On day 3, we had 3 2's. So if you follow this pattern, if I say how many, a particular time t has passed, how much money are we going to have? Well, we're going to have 5 times 2 times 2 times 2 ... This is going to happen t times. Whoops, t times. There we go. And again, let's just figure out how we got that pattern. We started with $5 on our first day. We multiplied it by 2. Now that's how much money. If you multiply that out, yes, you would have $10. But I'm keeping the multiplied by 2 to illustrate what's happening. Then on the next day, you're taking what you had the previous day, 5 times 2, and you're multiplying that by 2. Then on the third day, you are taking what you had on day 2, which is 5 times 2 times 2, and you're multiplying that by 2. So this pattern will continue. The number of days that we're talking about that have passed, that's how many times we would have multiplied by 2. So the formula that we get is 5 times, right? So the amount of money will equal our initial amount, $5, times 2 raised to the power of t. This is our first exponential model. The amount of money that we have will equal $5, right, 5 because that was our initial amount, and we're going to double that, multiply it by 2, for a certain amount of days. Now let's use this model to answer a few questions. Right. Now we get to a specific question regarding this model. If you start with $5 and it doubles every day, how much money would you have after 8 days? So we just saw in that last slide how we could illustrate this particular situation with a model. And what we found was the amount of money that we had was equal to how much we started with, and we were doubling that. And if we're doubling that, we're constantly multiplying by what? Well, we're multiplying by 2. And 2 how many times? Well, that depends on the time. So here, this is the amount of money. So I'll just abbreviate this as amount of money, just to recall. T was time in days. So I'm telling you how many days have passed. 8 days have passed. So I will take my model, and I'm just going to rewrite it, and you have to think to yourself, are you going to be plugging in for M, or are you going to be plugging in for T? Now this may seem slightly obvious, but when we get to a more complicated example, you're going to have to know whether or not it's going in for T or for M, and depending on what you're plugging in for, you have to solve it in 2 very different ways. But this one is pretty straightforward. We're told that 8 days have passed. That's telling us the time. So what we're doing is we're going to take M, that's what we're looking for, and instead of plugging in T, I'm raising 2 to the 8th power. So if you pick up your calculator and multiply that out, and I have to use my phone, so give me 1 second. So if you take 2 and you raise it to the 8th power, and then you multiply that times 5, you should get 1,280. 1,280. So that means that we will have, if you double this, $5 you double this every day, you will get 1,280. Now let's take this example one more step. Okay, now using our model, we want to determine how many days it will take to have $10,240. Now let's recall our model. The amount of money we have will equal $5 times 2 raised to the power of t, where t is the number of days that have passed. So after 1 day, after 2 days, whatever it may be. Now I decided to solve this problem using a chart. Later on, when we get into more complicated examples, we're going to have a more straightforward way to actually calculate for t. Right? You should notice that what we're looking for now is that we are given what m is. So if you think about it, really what we have now is we want to solve this equation. 10,240 is equal to 5 times 2 to the t. This is the equation that we are solving. Right? In that last example, we were looking for the amount of money, so we plugged in for a value of t. In this example, we're told how much money we have. So m is what we have. What we don't have is t. Now, the straightforward way is going to be coming up later, and what we need to be able to do to solve for this value of t, you might be saying, why don't we just move this 5 over here, and somehow, what can we do when we take the square root? We could get that variable down. Well, it turns out the only way that we can get this variable down from here to solve for this t is by using what are called logarithms. And that's going to be a future podcast, but let's take a different approach. If we don't want to have to use logarithms, is there another way that we can solve this? The answer is yes. But it's going to be a little bit longer. It's going to be a guess and check kind of a way. What we can do is just plug in various numbers for t and find out and figure out when exactly this side, we plug in 1, we plug in 2, we plug in 3, when will this side be equal to 10,240? Now over here on the left, I've already started to do that. When I plug in 0, well, this is the initial starting point. I know when I plug in 0, 5 times 2 to the 0, 2 to the 0 is 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. Multiply that by 5, that's $5. That makes sense. That's how much money we're starting with. If I plug in 1 after 1 day, well, t is now 1. 5 times 2 to the first power, well, I know after the first day it's just going to be doubled, so that's just $10. On that last slide, we found out that it was 8 days later, we had 1,280. So what I'm going to continue to do here is just continually multiply by 2. Let's plug in 9. So if you were to plug in 9, what do you get? Well, you could plug in 9 in for t, and what you'll find is when you double your previous day, or you plug in 9, what you'll get is 2,560. Right? And I'm just going to continue this. Now, when I plug in, again, 5 times 2 to the 10th, I double that, I get 5,120. And let's try one more day here. When we plug in 11, we will have 5 times 2 to the 11th power. We get 10,240. That's what we were looking for right there. This is what we were looking for. And what did it take? It took plugging in 11 for t. So when t is equal to 11, then m was equal to 10,240. In other words, it took 11 days. Right? After 11 days, you will have $10,240. Now, just to summarize once again, on that last slide, you were asked a specific question after a certain amount of time, after 8 days. You were told what t was, so that was easy. You just plugged in for t. In this example, it's a little bit more complicated. We're not told what t is. We need to solve for t. What we're told is what m is, how much money we have at the end. Now, the only way in the future that we can really get that variable down to solve for it is by using logarithms. The other way that we could do that is by just plugging various values in for t and wait and see what we get when this right side is equal to 10,240. And we found that that was 11.